In this lesson, we're going to discuss a few ways that we can customize our initial Spring MVC configuration. If we look at our current web.xml file, you'll notice that we have declared our dispatcher servlet and we have relied upon the conventions. So the conventions state that Spring will look for a dispatcher-servlet.xml file in order to provide the configuration for this web application context. You can see within the project, under the webinf directory, we have provided the dispatcher-servlet.xml file because Spring takes the name of the servlet and then appends -servlet.xml in order to find that configuration file. And then this configuration file provides all of the behavior for the container being configured for our web application context. Within Spring MVC, each dispatcher servlet will map to an application context. Each application context represents a Spring IOC container. And if you're familiar with Spring, you know that the IOC container is responsible for instantiating, configuring, and injecting your beans. Within this dispatcher servlet, we would provide all of our configuration for Spring MVC. But what if we wanted to customize a few things about this configuration? For example, let's say we wanted to place our dispatcher servlet in a different location. For example, we're going to create a new folder. Just click on webinf, hit Ctrl-N, and then type folder, select folder, and we're going to put a new folder named Spring, and then we're just going to drag and drop the dispatcher servlet into that Spring folder. At this point, our configuration will be broken because our application will not be able to find the configuration file. I can go ahead and we can run this application. So I'll just right-click on the project, hit Run As, and then Run on Server. And if we look at our console, we'll notice that we're going to get some errors when configuring because it cannot find our dispatcher servlet. See how it's looking for it in webinf/dispatcher-servlet.xml? The way we can customize that is we can go back to our web.xml file and we can provide parameters to our servlet. We're going to use an init parameter. We just place that tag below our servlet class, and then we need to provide a parameter name, and the parameter name is going to be context config location. And now we need to provide a parameter value, and for the parameter value, we just need to provide the path to our configuration file. So there's dispatcher-servlet.xml. And now if we were to run our application, you'll notice if we watch our console that the application will run correctly because we have found the dispatcher servlet and we have instantiated it properly. So here you see within the log that Spring is instantiating all of the XML bean definitions from the servlet context that is found in the dispatcher-servlet.xml. So that's a way we can customize the location of our configuration files. Another way you can customize the dispatcher servlet configuration is to map the dispatcher servlet to a different URL. For example, if you wanted to map the dispatcher servlet to a URL, let's say it was spring app /*, so this would indicate you would map all requests that begin with spring app to our dispatcher servlet. Anything with that pattern in the URL would get mapped to our dispatcher servlet. So that's another way you can configure your Spring MVC configuration. The final configuration we'll show you is we'll run through a demonstration of using a wildcard to detect the context config locations. Let's imagine we had another configuration file. So I'm just going to add the Spring Bean configuration file, and I'm going to name it dispatcher2-servlet.xml. So we'll create that file, And now what we can do is actually specify a wildcard within our parameter value for the context config location parameter that we're providing to the servlet. And this will cause both of the configuration files to be picked up and instantiated. Let's restart our server. You can just go down to the Pivotal TC server and right click it and then hit restart. And you'll notice that the server will begin to restart. If we search through the console output, we're going to see the different XML files being picked up by our dispatcher servlet and instantiated. There we see one. It's loading the XML configuration file. So there's dispatcher servlet XML being loaded, and here's dispatcher servlet 2-XML being loaded. Both of those configuration files were picked up and loaded because we were able to use this wildcard within our parameter value. Now, it's not common to use a wildcard in this situation. Normally, you just have one XML configuration file for your dispatcher servlet, but you'll see a little bit later that you can add root application context to your configuration for Spring MVC. And in that case, you may want to use the wildcarding feature. These are just some options that you can use to customize how you configure Spring MVC. There's a lot of flexibility built into the framework that you can take advantage of.